Karen's fists slammed against the HOA office door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. Her face was red, hair wild, eyes blazing with the kind of rage only a person losing control could feel. "Open this door right now!" she screeched, her voice cracking under the strain. On the other side of the locked entrance, I stood still, leaning casually against the wall, the key to her kingdom resting comfortably in my pocket. Behind her, board members hovered in stunned silence, unsure whether to comfort her or step away from the storm. I took a slow sip of coffee, the steam curling lazily in the cool morning air, and watched her realize, for the first time, that she had no authority here anymore. This was my land now, and every inch of it was mine by law. But it hadn't always been that way. It all began with my lake cabin. I'd owned that lake cabin for nearly 15 years, a small wooden retreat my father and I built by hand on weekends, nailing in every board with the kind of care you only give to something you plan to keep forever. Summers there were sacred. Lazy fishing mornings, kids jumping off the dock, evenings spent watching the water glow gold under the setting sun. It wasn't just property, it was the heart of my family's memories. That's why it felt like a gut punch when Karen, our self-appointed HOA queen, moved into the neighborhood. She wasn't just nosy. She was relentless, enforcing rules no one had voted on, making up new ones as she went, and treating every conversation like a courtroom trial. I thought I could ignore her, stay off her radar. But I didn't know that Karen had bigger plans. And at the center of them was the cabin my family cherished most. It started with a letter, official-looking, stamped with the HOA logo, and slid under my cabin door like some sort of eviction notice. At first, I thought it was another one of Karen's petty warnings about unauthorized dock repairs or non-regulation lawn chairs. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. According to the HOA, my lake cabin had been reassigned to a new owner, Karen's son, effective immediately. The letter claimed there had been a property line reassessment and that the cabin fell under common area management, meaning it was now under HOA control. I thought it was a prank, maybe even a clerical error, until I drove out there and found her son unloading boxes on my porch like he'd just closed on the deal of a lifetime. Karen stood proudly beside him, arms crossed, lips pursed in victory. "You weren't maintaining it properly," she said, as if she had any authority over my home. I told her she had no right, that this was theft, plain and simple. She smirked and replied, "It's HOA business now. If you don't like it, take it up with the board." That's when I realized Karen wasn't just pushing boundaries, she was erasing them entirely. The harassment began almost immediately after that. Day at the cabin. Every week, sometimes twice a week, I'd find a fresh envelope in my mailbox stamped with the HOA's seal. They were filled with trumped-up violations, claims that my dock was too long, that my cabin's paint color wasn't community-approved, even that my firewood pile was an unsightly hazard. Each letter came with a fine, and each fine was bigger than the last. At first, I laughed them off, thinking it was nothing more than Karen flexing her imaginary muscles. But then I noticed the language shifting, words like mandatory compliance and foreclosure action slipped in, designed to scare me. She'd even started leaving notes taped directly to my cabin door, bold red ink underlining phrases like final notice, as if she owned the place. It was harassment dressed up as bureaucracy, and it was working. My patience was wearing thin. When the letters didn't rattle me enough, Karen moved on to public humiliation. She started cornering neighbors during their morning walks, spinning wild stories about me. I overheard her telling one man that I'd abandoned the cabin for years and that the HOA had rescued it from falling into disrepair. To another, she claimed I was refusing to pay my dues, painting me as some sort of freeloading squatter living on community land. At the grocery store, people I'd known for years started avoiding eye contact. One neighbor I used to fish with refused to let his kids come over to the dock. The worst part wasn't the rumors. It was the way people believed her without ever asking me for the truth. Karen wasn't just stealing my property, she was stealing my reputation. One whisper at a time, I decided it was time to get legal help. I hired a local attorney, a man with 30 years of property law experience, and handed him every deed, receipt, and document I had, proving the cabin was mine. He seemed confident at first, saying Karen didn't have a legal leg to stand on. But weeks dragged into months, and every time I called for an update, his tone grew less certain. The HOA board, stacked with Karen's friends, refused to meet with us. Our letters went unanswered, our calls ignored. When we finally filed a formal complaint, the county clerk told us the property lines had been reclassified under HOA jurisdiction, a move that, while shady, wasn't technically illegal because of an old loophole in the subdivision's charter. My lawyer admitted it would take years and tens of thousands of dollars to fight. Karen had built herself a fortress of red tape, and I was stuck pounding on the gates. Meanwhile, the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. My family stopped coming to the cabin because it was no longer a place of peace. The kids didn't want to hear Karen's son shouting insults from the porch or see no trespassing signs nailed to the trees we once picnicked under. My wife hated the constant tension and worried about the cost of legal battles we might not win. Even I started avoiding the place, driving past the turnoff and telling myself I'd deal with it next weekend. But every time I stayed away, I knew Karen was winning. She wanted me gone, broken, and exhausted. And for a while, it was working. Until the day I stumbled across something that would turn the entire war upside down. It happened almost by accident. I was in town, killing time at a small coffee shop while waiting for my truck's oil change, when I overheard two older men at the next table talking about a piece of commercial property going up for sale. At first, I didn't think much of it, until one of them mentioned the address. My ears perked up. It was the exact lot where the HOA office sat, a squat brick building Karen treated like her personal throne room. I pulled out my phone and checked the county's property listings. Sure enough, the land under the HOA office wasn't owned by the HOA at all. It belonged to a private landlord who just put it on the market. My mind raced. If I could buy that land, I'd control the building they operated from. No office meant no operations. I didn't tell a soul, not my lawyer, not my wife, not even my closest friend. For weeks, I quietly researched the sale, checked zoning laws, and moved money into place. Every time Karen smirked at me from across the street, I bit my tongue, knowing she had no idea her empire was about to crumble from beneath her feet. The day I signed the papers, the air felt different, lighter, sharper, charged with the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you're about to win a war you were never supposed to survive. The real estate agent slid the deed across the table, and as my pen scratched my signature, I could almost hear the foundation of Karen's little kingdom cracking. I didn't just own a piece of land. I owned the ground beneath her authority. Within an hour, I had the title registered, copies made, and a quiet smile plastered on my face. I didn't tell anyone where I was going next. I wanted the look on her face to be unfiltered, pure disbelief. That afternoon, I walked straight into the HOA board meeting. Karen sat at the head of the long oak table, holding court like a queen, surrounded by her loyal subjects. The room fell silent as I dropped the deed onto the table in front of her. "What's this supposed to be?" she scoffed, trying to mask the flicker of doubt in her eyes. I leaned in, my voice calm but cutting. "That's the paperwork showing I now own this land, which means you're operating on my property without permission." The board members looked at each other, their smug expressions melting into unease. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but for the first time since I'd met her, she didn't have the words. The next morning, I arrived at the HOA office before anyone else. With a locksmith at my side, we changed every lock on the building: front door, side door, storage shed. The sound of the drill biting into the old hardware was music to my ears. By the time Karen pulled into the lot, I was standing there, keys, dangling from my hand. She stormed up to me, demanding I let her in, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. I simply smiled and said, "No trespassing," and I meant it. That same afternoon, I posted bright red and white, "No trespassing." Private property, signs along the perimeter. Each one was like a nail sealing the coffin of her reign. Neighbors driving by slowed down, their faces registering a mix of shock and delight. Karen could pound on that door all she wanted, but it would never open for her again. For the first time in months, I felt the kind of peace that can only come when you've not just survived the storm, you've turned it back on the one who started it. Karen's meltdown was everything I'd imagined and more. She stood in the parking lot, shouting into her phone, pacing like a caged animal, while the rest of the HOA board hovered awkwardly nearby. Without access to the office, they couldn't process fines, hold meetings, or even send out their endless stream of threatening letters. Neighbors who had once avoided me now slowed down to watch the spectacle, some even giving me subtle nods of approval. The rumors Karen had spread about me evaporated faster than morning fog, replaced with whispered stories about how I'd outplayed her at her own game. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't in watching her rage. It was in knowing the cabin was mine. My family's peace was restored, and Karen's reign of intimidation had ended. Standing on my porch that evening, watching the sun sink over the lake, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. For the first time. In months, the air was calm, the water still. Karen had learned the hard way that when you push someone too far, they might just find a way to take the ground out from under you, literally. Karen thought it was over. The locks were changed, the signs were up, and the HOA office sat dark and empty. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like her, it's that they don't know when to quit. Just 2 weeks later, I woke up to the sound of tires crunching on gravel and saw her standing at the end of my driveway, holding a thick stack of papers and wearing a smile that didn't belong on a defeated woman. Whatever was in that stack wasn't just trouble, it was her next move. And it was worse than anything I'd seen before. If you enjoyed watching Karen get a taste of her own medicine, make sure to hit that like button. It tells me you want more stories just like this. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter, because trust me, you're going to want to see what Karen tried next. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or a neighbor who thought they ruled the block, drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Your experience might just inspire my next video. Now, let's get ready for round 2 with Karen.